If you could pick the ideal qualities of your next U.S. Senator, what would they be? How about someone who's been a success all his life, building businesses and helping to create...
As a politician, Mitt Romney touted the skills he learned in the private equity world. But many people have little idea what that business actually is. In 1984, he left a comfortable job as a top consultant at Bain & Company to start an investment firm called Bain Capital. As a consultant, Romney had told other people how to run their businesses. But now the Bain brand would be putting its money where its mouth was.
Bain Capital was at both ends of the hook. They had to give themselves good advice, and they had to ensure that they could execute. Either end could have been wrong, but if you got both ends right, the returns were magnificent.
As head of the new Bain spin-off company, Romney was under intense pressure. Big money and the hard-earned Bain reputation were on the line.
Mitt used to get nervous. He used to flip his tie like his heart was palpitating and making his tie flip. He used to also laugh about pitting. You know, his armpits would, he'd sweat, and the stress would, especially when he wore a blue shirt.
In spite of the stresses, Romney excelled. During his 15-year tenure, Bain Capital grew from a 7-person firm investing a $37 million fund to 150 employees managing $13 billion in assets. One of his strengths was his ability to be persuasive. He could bring a room full of highly intelligent, strong-willed board members to consensus without ruffling a feather.
He would say, Marty, you just said such and such. I guess what you're really looking for is this, right? And Marty would say, yeah. Or, Arthur, I know what your concern is. It's that, right? Well, God, and he's also very shucks G. Willikers in how he'd say things. Gosh, it strikes me that if we did such and such, we could deal with Arthur's concern, we could deal with Marty's concern, and Tom, I think it would be consistent with the strategy you wanted to pursue. And you'd say, mentally, you'd say, thank you very much.
As a leader, appearance was important to him. The offices of Bain Capital were famously austere, and its employees didn't spend lavishly on trips and meals.
Mitt was cheap. Threw nickels around like manhole covers.
Well, Mitt inherently is a very value-oriented person. By that I mean he's cheap.
I mean, we were so cheap that we would sneak over to Bain & Company and steal lunches out of the conference rooms that were being catered for Bain & Company team meetings.
Romney's frugal approach was a factor in Bain's decision to invest in what would become Staples, the office supply superstore. While other investors were skeptical that business customers would save more than a few pennies on office supplies, Romney and Bain took the time to thoroughly analyze whether there was a market. To their surprise, they found that shopping at Staples, a warehouse of office products, could be a way for businesses to save real money.
They actually got into the effort of going through the invoices of all these little companies, added them all up, and found out that, lo and behold, the market was even slightly larger than I thought it was.
Staples would go on to become a retail phenomenon.
Mitt Romney has spent his life building more than 20 businesses and helping to create more than 10,000 jobs. So when it comes to creating...
While Romney, the politician, frequently pointed to Staples as an example of his venture capital prowess, startups were not the kind of companies Bain Capital ultimately focused on. Bain soon began specializing in what are called leveraged buyouts, or LBOs, which use borrowed cash to buy an existing company, improve its performance, and resell it at a profit.
They could take something like Dunkin' Donuts, for example, and say, Dunkin' Donuts has a strong regional brand. They don't do much on the other side of the Mississippi. Let's bring in management. Let's figure out how to grow this company. And in 2 or 3 years later, we will either sell it or we will take it public and get our money out.
LBOs frequently resulted in massive returns for Bain, which often extracted fees no matter what the outcome for the company it acquired. And while the potential payoff was typically higher in LBOs than in venture capital investing, the risks were lower. Romney explains why Bain became primarily an LBO firm.
What we found with experience was that there's a lot greater risk in a startup than there is in acquiring an existing company and trying to make it better. I didn't want to invest in startups where the success of the enterprise depended upon something that was out of our control, such as could Dr. X make the technology work, or would the market develop in the future that had not yet come to fruition.
Targeting firms for leveraged buyouts is very different from investing in startups, where new companies and new jobs are created. Both types of ventures are intended to make money, but LBOs often result in immediate job losses, since firms like Bain Capital sometimes extract additional profits from an existing business by shrinking the company, moving jobs offshore, or firing people.
This is a business. It is not a nonprofit. It is not built for the public good. There are fringe benefits. When a company grows, such as Staples, and employs lots of people, yes, society benefits. But the goal of the investor in Bain Capital is to make absolute returns, capital on capital. When they do well, Bain does well. When Bain does well, the investors do well. It is essentially capitalism at its finest and its worst.